But I want to take a break this morning and preach about the impending war with Iraq. It's been pretty despicable to me to watch almost all of conservative talk show, almost all of, if not all, Christian radio talk shows, all Christian periodicals, the press at large, and the American people at large going along with this war and even cheerleading George Bush in what he's doing. It's been disconcerting to me because I believe it's an unjust war, and I intend to prove that to you this morning by looking at the impending war with Iraq in light of the just war theory. And that is the title of my sermon this morning, The Just War Theory and Iraq. So let's stand up and we'll have a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time that we have together here this morning. God, I just ask and pray that you'd use this sermon for good. It deals with a matter of dire importance regarding our nation doing right, our nation's liberties, and much more, the lives of people. God, I just ask and pray that you would be glorified in what I have to say and use it for good in each one's life here, so that they might know you and your ways better. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. You could be seated. I want to begin this sermon by saying there is a real move over the last 40 years among writers on the topic of war, including those who believe war can be just or justified, that war is intrinsically evil, and therefore one must fall all over himself to trounce war and declare how despicable they think it is before they go on to try and justify it. I disagree with this. I think war can not only be just or justified, but that it can be good and an intrinsic duty for man to participate in. I'll go even beyond that and say I believe the desire to war is a vestige of God in the bosom of every man. Even the pagans seem to understand this, in that many of the movies they produce and the books that they write deal with good versus evil. There is the vestige of God in the bosom of man to want to war, to want to see evil trounced and the good triumphed. I say a vestige of God because the Scriptures are clear that God is not a pacifist. In fact, the Scripture openly declares he is a man of war. Genesis 15, verse 3. This was declared immediately after the Lord had annihilated Pharaoh's army, you may recall. Furthermore, when God set up his economy with the children of Israel, he set up rules of warfare, rules by which to wage war for his people in Deuteronomy chapter 20. In the New Testament, when Jesus was taken in the garden, he did not resist because it was the Father's will that he die. But he made this statement when he did not resist. He said, quote, "Do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels?" God is not a pacifist. Revelation 19:11 says of Jesus, "Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on him," talking about Christ, "was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war." God is not a pacifist. War can be good, and it can be an intrinsic duty of man to participate in it. Now, though I say such things, and by doing hold war in esteem far more than most, let me add this. I am a student of history, particularly military history, and of all the history I have studied, including our own nation's, I must say that only about 5% of wars ever fought have been, in my estimation, just. Only 5%. So this is somewhat of a paradox. I, who holds war in esteem, would rarely ever fight in a war, as I would only ever fight in a just war. Yet those who think war can be justified, yet feverishly fall all over themselves to denounce how evil war is and declare it intrinsically evil, are usually the ones who in the end will support or fight in any war that comes down the pike. Their attitude is, government, show me where to go. Press, teach me who is evil. So, in light of this statement, I repeat, war can be good and it can be an intrinsic duty of man to participate in it, but it must be just. Nations corporately and you as an individual should only participate in just wars. The just war theory is a primarily Christian doctrine, although you can see it in the writings of pagans also. Let me share with you just a very brief history of the just war theory. It is not the purpose of this sermon to go into its intricacies or lay out its every view and historical development. Rather, it is the purpose of this sermon to examine the impending war with Iraq in light of the just war theory's main tenets. The first nearly 400 years of Christianity produced no writings on this subject because Christianity was a persecuted religion for over the first 300 years of its existence. Once it was embraced by Rome, however, Christian men began to gain positions of power all the way up to the emperor himself. I'm thinking particularly of Theodosius, being a great Roman emperor and a Christian man. Christian men in positions of civil power necessitated rules for governing as Christian men. The state was given the sword by God, according to Romans 13. Christian magistrates needed to know how to wield it in a just manner. This included its use in warfare. Augustine is the first Christian theologian to write on and develop this matter. Other notable writers who helped develop the just war theory over the centuries are Thomas Aquinas, Hugo Grotius, and Samuel Pufendorf. The just war theory is a set of principles or guidelines wherein the state knows whether it is justified in taking military action and whether an individual is justified in participating in the military action. It also sets forth a set of principles and guidelines to follow as how to fight a just war once it is ascertained that a war is just. The principles or guidelines wherein one determines if a war is just is referred to in the Latin as jus ad bellum. The principles or guidelines one is to follow in fighting a just war is referred to in the Latin as jus in bello. We will only consider the jus ad bellum. We want to simply determine, is a war with Iraq just? What are the main tenets of jus ad bellum in the just war theory? The 5 main tenets which we will consider are, number 1, the cause for war must be just. This includes defense against wrongful attack, retaking something wrongly taken, punishment of evil done. War is to be a last resort. All nonviolent options must be exhausted first. So number 1 is the cause for war must be just. Number 2, war must be declared and waged by a legitimate authority. Number 3, war must be waged for the right intention. Number 4, war can only be fought if there is a reasonable chance of success. And number 5, the means used in the war must be proportionate to the wrongs suffered. The means used in the war must be proportionate to the wrongs suffered. Let's dispense with a few of these, and then we'll move on to the meat of my message. Number 2, war must be declared by a legitimate authority. Most all men in the world today recognize that war can only be declared by a legal government, by governments of nations. In other words, war can only be declared by a legitimate authority. That authority must do so in keeping with whatever recognized government in a nation conducts its proceedings. How they conduct their proceedings must be followed according to their laws. In this case, this principle or guideline is satisfied in regards to the war with Iraq. Congress, many months ago, gave the President the carte blanche authority to use force for his war on terrorism. However muddled that declaration was, it nevertheless has been done, And the President has said war with Iraq is a necessary component of his war on terrorism. What our congressman did there was wrong, brothers and sisters. Giving him the authority, this carte blanche authority, was wrong. Nevertheless, it's been done, and war has been declared according to our laws by legitimate authority. Let's consider number 4. War can only be fought if there is reasonable chance of success. War can only be fought if there is reasonable chance of success. This guideline is clearly satisfied in regards to the war with Iraq. We could not only beat them with our hands tied behind our backs, but with our eyes blindfolded too. Is this not true? We're going to beat up on a nation who doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of offering us any sound resistance. Notice we allow North Korea to get away with what it's getting away with right now, actually challenging us to a war. Yet Iraq, who wants nothing to do with war with us, is the one who's the bad guy. The reason for this guideline, war can only be fought if there is reasonable chance of success, is that it would be unjust to ask men to sacrifice their lives for a cause that was hopelessly unwinnable. The first 2 that I've looked at have been satisfied. Number 2 must be declared by legitimate authority, and 4 can only be fought if there is a reasonable chance of success. Now let's look at number 5. Number 5 is the means used in the war must be proportionate to the wrong suffered. The means used in the war, how this war is fought, what we do, must be proportionate to the wrong suffered. This main tenet cannot be answered. Why? Because our government has not defined how this war will be waged and what defines, quote unquote, mission accomplished. It's muddled. In the first Gulf War, everyone knew the objective was to liberate Kuwait and push the Iraqis back into their own borders. We knew how the war would be waged. We knew when the mission would be considered accomplished. Baghdad was bombed in retaliation for what they did to the Kuwaitis' land. We knew when the mission would be accomplished. This time it's muddled. Nobody even knows really what it is, other than we seem to be headed for a change in government. There's no timeline in, there's no timeline out. But more important than that in regards to this guideline is this, and listen to me. How can we determine if the means used in this war is proportionate to the wrong suffered when we don't know what the wrong suffered is? How can we determine if the means used in this war is proportionate to the wrong suffered when we don't know what the wrong suffered is? And that brings me to the next thing I want to look at and to the meat of my message. The first main tenet of just war theory is the cause for war must be just. This includes defense against wrongful attack, retaking something wrongly taken, punishment of evil done. Number 1 can be answered. And though number 2 and number 4 tenets, we can say yes, those were satisfied. And number 3, we can't really answer. Number 1, the first tenet, can be answered. And the answer is no. The cause for war is not just. We have not suffered any wrongful attack from Iraq. We have not had something wrongfully taken. They have done no evil to us, nor to anyone else. In his State of the Union address the other week, George Bush said in regards to the impending war with Iraq, quote, "We will fight for a just cause with just means," unquote. I submit to you, brothers and sisters, that there is not just cause for this war, and that it is already being fought with unjust means, including international diplomatic thuggery, demonization, and outright lies. What we have here, brothers and sisters, is a president who is so desperate to justify his war that he makes a mountain out of 12 old empty warheads found lying around. All the press echoes his horror and shock at such a find. And when saner heads suggest that this is molehills made into mountains, he has the audacity to turn it on its head and say, this could be just the tip of the iceberg. Do you recall Fort McCoy a few years ago? Had a huge scandal break out where military men were selling armored vehicles and tanks and all kinds of military equipment for almost 6 years without our government even realizing these vehicles were missing. These guys made millions. You see what I'm saying? Here's Iraq. We find 12 warheads. We say they haven't accounted for everything. And yet look at our own government. Its own military men can sell millions of dollars worth of military equipment, and it takes 6 years before someone notices it's missing. I would say that's a double standard. In his State of the Union address, Bush referred to Iraq as an, quote, outlawed regime. What constitutes an outlawed regime? I ask. Any government that the UN doesn't like? Any government that George Bush doesn't like? The truth is, Hussein is not a team player. He doesn't get along with the UN game plan. Therefore, just like Milosevic, he must be demonized and removed. You need to watch for the word outlawed or rogue that's being thrown around by the press. They are the words of demonization, the labels that the UN slaps on anyone who doesn't go along with their one world agenda. Recently, there was a news article not too long ago about a Pakistani border guard who fired on American troops. And the Pakistani border guard who fired on those American troops was referred to as a rogue border guard. What rogue is to the UN and to George Bush and his one world buddies, rogue is anyone who doesn't want to play according to their game. That's what constitutes being outlawed. That's what constitutes being rogue. You're against the one world order, and you're not playing the game. I'm thinking about getting a bumper sticker that says, rogue citizen on board, just to stick it in their face. President Bush calls Hussein a thug, but in reality it's our highest government officials, Colin Powell, Donald Rumsfeld, etc., that have traversed the globe meeting with the leaders of other nations, many of whom receive billions of dollars from the U.S. in foreign aid every year, trying to coerce them into backing our war. So who has been acting as a thug? It is our government, in conjunction with Tony Blair's Britain, that held a meeting in England for Iraqi dissidents way back in early December. Do you remember that? To formulate a government to replace Hussein. We are the ones acting like bullies. We are the ones acting like thugs. George Bush lies and says that Iraq is associated with and has ties to Al-Qaeda. Yet former CIA counterterrorism chief Vincent Canestraro said last summer that there was no evidence of a link. And Hans Blix just said 9 days ago, on January 31st of 2003, that Bush is wrong when he says that Iraq has ties to Al-Qaeda. The CIA itself has also debunked the White House allegation that there was a meeting in Prague between the 911 hijacker Atta and Iraqi intelligence. Now Powell makes a new allegation this past week, which is not verifiable, and we're expected to believe it. Meanwhile, while we point the finger at Iraq, the truth is the biggest fundraisers and cheerleaders of the 911 terrorists came from the very nations that were saved by the first Bush war against Iraq. 15 of the hijackers were Saudi Arabians. None of them were Iraqis. American health workers in Saudi Arabia said the Saudis cheered in the streets when 911 took place. And yet, they're called our allies. What we have here is a president desperate to justify his war. And the truth is, it's unjustifiable. In his recent State of the Union address, the president grumbled about how we have asked the inspectors to go on a, quote, scavenger hunt in a country the size of California, unquote. I respond by saying, please, with our technology, they're on a scavenger hunt. We have satellites that can read quarters laying on sidewalks. We have eavesdropping devices that can pick up anything. We should be able to tell the inspectors right where to go if there's something over there to get. You may see Iraq start making admissions in the days ahead that aren't even true. For what purpose? Just to save themselves from war. That's how heavy-duty the thuggery, the diplomatic international thuggery, has been against them. Bush moaned that on and about how Iraq should have to prove they don't have weapons of mass destruction. Have you picked up on that? This has been his moan over and over again. They have to prove they don't have something they don't have. It's a logical absurdity. But more importantly, do you see a new standard being set here in regards to Iraq? It's called you're guilty till you prove yourself innocent. No longer does the United States have to prove they have something they shouldn't have. Now Iraq has to prove that they're innocent. We're the ones making the allegations. We should have to prove they have it. You're innocent until proven guilty. At least that's how it used to be in America. And we can see in American jurisprudence we're moving away from that too. Towards this thing of you have to prove you're innocent. It's already that way when it comes to family court law. As one columnist put it, quote, we are subjected to evidence of hide and seek as the impetus why war is a necessity. I thought it summed it up perfect because that's all I could think of when I watched George Bush's State of the Union address. I watched the whole thing, as painful as it was. I watched the whole thing. And I watched all of Colin Powell's talk to the UN, all 1 hour and 16 minutes of it. This columnist put it best. We are subjected to evidence of hide and seek as the impetus why war is a necessity. Unquote. Is this not true? Bush is trying to make this the justification for war. Did they hide something or not? We're going to go to war over that? Put yourself in their place. George Bush has been saying, and he said at his State of the Union address too, he said, quote, this is what he said to Iraq, quote, disarm or be attacked. And that's been the message from the UN, from George Bush, disarm, 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 or be attacked. What would you do? I always try to put myself in the other person's position. What would you do? You don't disarm, and they attack. You disarm, and they attack anyway. You're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Let's live in the real world here, brothers and sisters. Are they not a sovereign nation? Do they not have the right to defend themselves? Why is it okay for China, as filthy as that government is, to have all the weapons of mass destruction that they have, but Iraq can't? What about North Korea? You see what I'm saying? What about the United States? Any way you look at it, this war is not just. We have not been attacked. We have not had anything wrongly taken. They have not done evil to us, nor to anyone else. Let me ask you a question. If Iraq is such a threat, why haven't any of their neighbors attacked them in a preventative strike? If Iraq is such a threat, why haven't any of their neighbors attacked them in a preventative strike? especially Israel. Someone bats their eye and Israel's over there annihilating them, bombing the daylights out of their neighbors. Every time someone actually does do something to them, they strike back fourfold. If Iraq is such a threat, why haven't any of their neighbors attacked them in a preventative strike? Or why haven't any of them asked the U.S. to help them fight Iraq? None of their neighbors have. When we fought them in 1990, Kuwait asked us to come and help because Saddam had crossed into their borders, and was destroying their country. This is a totally different situation here. This war is unjust. The cause for this war is not just. Now, I want to briefly look at number 3, which is the last of the 5 tenets, which is war must be waged for the right intention. This is the last main tenet to consider. War must be waged for the right intention. The stated intentions for war by our government is, number 1, we are supposedly going to war with Iraq to protect ourselves and the world from terrorism. We are supposedly going to war with Iraq to protect ourselves and the world from terrorism. And number 2, we are supposedly going to war with Iraq to liberate the Iraqi people from a dictator. Kind of like when we went over to Bosnia, to liberate the people there and bomb the snot out of the whole countryside and killed a bunch of civilians. Let's deal with the first one, which is we are supposedly going to war with Iraq to protect ourselves and the world from terrorism. I believe the real reason we want to invade Iraq has to do with oil and control, and has nothing to do with protecting the world from terrorism. And let me state why I believe it has to do with oil. It's not because I'm some leftist who heard someone say that and I'm just barking it, repeating it like a parrot, just like all these Christians and conservatives parrot what George Bush has to say, as though what he says is true. I believe it because of history. Early in the 1950s, the American oil companies set up in Iraq for the first time, and they set up and made an arrangement with the government in Iraq that 50% of all their profits would go to the Iraqi people, would go to the Iraqi nation. So the American companies, oil companies went in, they get 50%, which is a huge killing for them financially, and they give 50% of the profits over to the nation in which they're drilling oil. Good for the American oil companies, good for a poor nation. When the Ba'ath Party came to power in 1968, which is the party that Saddam Hussein is a part of, when they came to power in 1968, they wanted control of the oil. And by 1973, they had taken over all of the oil production in their country. In other words, the oil companies aren't getting what they wanted. The government takes the oil and all its profits now. I believe there are those who stand to profit big if Hussein can be toppled and a U.S. UN-friendly government can replace him. And those who stand to make big are the oil companies themselves. Those who run them, those who own them. The profits will be huge for them. Because right now, the only one making profit off all that oil is Hussein. In his State of the Union address the other week, Bush described Iraq as a country, quote, with great potential wealth. I couldn't believe he said that. He quickly went on to say that a regime like Hussein's, quote, will not be allowed to dominate such a region. I believe it has to do with oil. I believe it has to do with control. And it doesn't have a lick to do with protecting the world against terrorism. You may recall in 1996 when we made airstrikes against Iraq. President Clinton was president at the time. Iraq backed the Kurdish Democratic Party, the KDP. And the U.S. backed the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK. What was going on when we did those airstrikes in 1996 was that in northern Iraq, Hussein doesn't even control the area. The Kurds live up there in the wild. And the Kurds, of course, have wanted to establish their own independence for years. And when Hussein's out, they probably will end up establishing their own independence, or the government that's put in place will include the Kurds in making decisions. This all has to do with the UN's fangling of world affairs. But in 1996, we were backing Kurdish rebels who were going to try to establish their independence separate from Iraq. And they were called the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. There are also Kurdish people who don't want to establish their own independence and want to remain a part of Iraq. And they are called the Kurdish Democratic Party, and they were backed by Iraq. Iraq decided to back, formally, the Kurdish Democratic Party in order to fight against the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, which was U.S.-backed. Now, this is in their own nation. The Iraqi government isn't crossing over any borders to do this. Our nation is fomenting rebellion in their nation. But because they take action against the group that we're using to foment rebellion in their own nation, we decide to bring airstrikes against Iraq. Now, your average American buttface doesn't have a clue all this went on, has a real short history span, can't even remember what he watched on Walt Disney last week. But I bring this to your attention as more proof that I believe that this has to do with oil. We responded, Secretary of Defense Perry, Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense Perry, responded and said, we are going to respond disproportionately. Disproportionately, remember? You're always supposed to respond proportionally. So I pick up on that. Disproportionately to what Iraq has done by backing the group that's pro-Iraqi. You know what they did? Under the quote-unquote intention of defending the Kurdish people from a tyrant like Hussein, they went and bombed all of the southern military installations of Iraq. Now, the fighting's going on in the north. All the Kurdish people are in the north. But we go and bomb everything down in the south. Does that make any sense to you? The reason they bombed everything in the south, brothers and sisters, is because the truth is they used what was happening to the Kurdish with the Kurdish situation up there as justification to weaken Saddam down by the oil states, down by the Gulf area. That's why they did it. Even though the fighting was in the north, we bombed southern Iraqi military installations, a clear effort to materially reduce Iraq's ability to mount a threat to the Gulf states where all the oil lies. This is about oil. Plain and simple. This is about money. This is about control, a lust for domination. Augustine said that is one of the wrong reasons to fight a war, a lust for domination. And I submit to you, that's what this is about. Money and a lust for domination. So, number one, when our country says we are supposedly going to war with Iraq to protect ourselves and the world from terrorism, I believe that's false, and I just gave my reasons why I believe it's false. Number two, we are supposedly going to war with Iraq to liberate the Iraqi people from a dictator. Let me ask you this. If Iraq is such an oppressive place, why don't we see swarms of refugees leaving it? Why don't we? Their borders are wide open. Anybody can walk out of that place. If it's such a rotten place, why don't we see a bunch of people leaving? Why do we see very few people leaving? Why could Colin Powell only name 4 people? He could only name 4 defectors as people from whom they've gotten a lot of their information from. Why isn't there scores of people coming out? Hundreds of people, thousands of people. If Saddam's such a madman, And it's such a terrible place to live. Where are the swarms of defectors? The truth of the matter is, our country says that Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against his own people. The truth of the matter is, he only used them against the Kurds who were trying to topple his own government. So technically, they were his people because they're in his country. But they were causing rebellion. I can guarantee you, if anybody raised a rebellion in this country, our government would use every weapon available to it to trash them. So let's be honest about what's being said here. And by the way, once we take over Iraq, there will be tons of people that they put in front of the cameras saying how glad they are that we've been liberated. Let me tell you, if someone overtook our country, we could find plenty of people in this country who we could put in front of the cameras to say, praise God, we're liberated. You could do that with any country. And that's all they put in front of the cameras. That's all they put in Afghanistan in front of the cameras, was the people who were glad, when the vast majority are sad that they were liberated from the Taliban. So numbers 2 and 4 have been satisfied of the 5 main tenets. Legitimate authority has been declared, and we can win easily. Number 3 cannot be answered. Proportionality cannot be determined because we have not suffered a wrong, and our government has not made clear the means used to wage this war. Number 1 can be answered, and the answer is no. The cause for war is not just. We have not suffered any wrongful attack with Iraq. We have not had something wrongfully taken. They have done no evil to us, nor to anyone. And number 5 is, there is ample evidence to question our intentions for wanting war. Nations always try to justify their wars with noble intentions, and most people are stupid, so stupid they believe them. Nations always try to justify their actions with noble intentions. The question is, you have a duty to sit there and discover whether it's true or not. Now let me respond to Paul's speech. And I put my sermon off for a week, you may recall, because I wanted to see the evidence which he presented for his justification for war. This was an unprecedented multimedia presentation. The UN does not let you into any of their meetings, not even their most mundane meetings where they decide what kind of toilet paper they're going to use at the building there in Manhattan. No one is allowed into any of their meetings. I know that. I've been there. I've toured the place. They don't allow you into any meetings, let alone the Security Council meeting. But here we have an unprecedented act where we're allowed into a Security Council meeting. The meeting is that we're allowed into, however, only is the part where Colin Powell talks. Colin Powell is afforded an hour and a half to speak. The other 14 on the Security Council are only allowed 7 minutes each to respond, and the Iraqi ambassador is allowed 7 minutes to respond. But as soon as Colin Powell is done speaking, we're taken out of the UN, and we don't get to hear the response. Now, does that seem fair to you? I mean, I've been in debates, I've witnessed debates, and you have to hear both sides of the story in order to render a proper decision in your mind who's right and who's wrong. But I guess we're too much of peons for our government to allow us to hear the other side of the story so we can analyze and critique and make a determination ourselves whether what Colin Powell said has any merit to it or not. That bothered the heck out of me. I sat there and listened to an hour and 16 minutes. You could see the guy from Germany and the guy from France were dying to get their 2 cents in. They get a whole 7 minutes after it's over. And we don't get to hear anything anybody else has to say. Do you know how Colin Powell was introduced before he spoke at the UN? This is how the guy introduced him. His Excellency, Mr. Colin Powell. His Excellency. I just about fell off my couch. It's like, didn't we fight a war to get rid of a stinking king? In his speech, Colin Powell referred to Resolution 1441 over and over again, and how Iraq has violated it, which in my mind warrants no justification for war whatsoever, and clearly does not stand up to the standard of the just war theory by any means. He went on to moan about the legacy of Iraq, their legacy of, quote, disturbing facts and behavior over the years. He used that term repeatedly. Disturbing facts and behavior over the years. Can't we say this of any government? I can say that of any government. They've had disturbing facts and behavior over the years. I can say that of our government. Why war with them? Hasn't China had disturbing facts and behavior over the years? Hasn't North Korea had disturbing facts and behavior over the years? But we're going to go beat up on Iraq. They played the audio tapes. The first thing you're thinking of is, how can you authenticate this? You could have put some people in a back room and brought this thing together. Not to mention the fact they played just a little part of a conversation. And I, having been demonized by the press many times in the past, can tell you full well that you can snip out something about somebody and paint them to be a freak or doing something that you're claiming they're doing when they're not even doing it. Supposedly, these two audio clips showed that they were trying to hide stuff. Some vehicle and some regular mundane ammunition. Even if they are, hiding things is now a crime worthy of a war? Again, I ask you, what would you do? You know they're coming. They're coming either way. Wouldn't you be trying to hide things? They try to make him out to be a madman because he's sitting there with all this military buildup. Well, you know what? If I was sitting in the Middle East, I'd probably have a lot of military buildup too. Especially if the United States was my enemy and Israel, their ally, was my enemy, my sworn enemy. I'd probably have a lot of military buildup too. Colin Powell talked about missiles hiding in palm tree groves. He said, quote, they can be moved every 1 to 4 weeks to avoid detection, unquote. If they can be moved every 1 to 4 weeks to avoid detection, then how do we know that they're there in the first place? How do we know they're there in the first place? The reason we know they're there is because we can follow anything they're doing in the country. We can follow them driving in a truck down the street. He talks about how they're loading stuff up at these ammunition dumps and moving it to hide it from the inspectors before they arrive. Well, why didn't you just follow the truck down the street, see where it stopped, and tell the inspectors to go there? They're allowing them to do surprise inspections wherever they want. This is their evidence that we have a right to go to war. It's enough to make you puke. The pictures. I sat there and looked at the pictures. Our technology is such we can read a quarter on the sidewalk. Yet Colin Powell's pictures were grainy, nasty pictures taken from far away. You couldn't even tell what was going on. They were indiscernible. They could have been pictures of a Walmart out in South Dakota, for all I know. Powell shows the pictures, describes what's going on in the picture, but there's no close-up to show what he's describing is happening in the picture. When we can read a quarter laying on the sidewalk. Why isn't there close-up pictures showing what you're telling me is happening on this side of the building that I can't see, Colin Powell? Interviews. The UN and Bush and all them are making a fit about the Iraqis not allowing their scientists to be interviewed or any government official to be interviewed. They want to be able to take these people out of Iraq with their families, interview them, and because the Iraqis aren't allowing that, they say this is a justification for war in itself. Well, think about it. you're heading up a country. If you allow your people to leave with all of their families, don't you think the other country or the other government or the UN might sit there and say to them, look, you're all out, you're safe now. Have I got a deal for you? You're going to live like a king the rest of your life. All your needs will be met. All you have to do is say X, Y, and Z about Saddam Hussein. You're all safe now. Let me tell you, people like this are a dime a dozen. They'll sell their soul for a pot of porridge. They'd gladly do it. So what's the big deal about them not allowing them to be interviewed without an Iraqi person being there, an Iraqi official being there? That's what I would do. I think it's an offense that the UN thinks it can come in and start talking to my citizens. Going into my citizens' homes. Looking at everything I have. I'd be irate. But he's a madman. We're the madmen. We're the thugs. It's the Americans. And this war is unjust. I don't trust rich politicos to run things in the world. I don't trust them because I've seen what they've done over the years. I've seen what's revealed once things are no longer held to be secretive by a government and are allowed to come into what was really going on. And our government lies through its teeth all the time. So why should I believe them that just trust us? They're bad and we need to blow the hell out of them. I don't trust you. And I don't think I'm a bad person because I don't trust you. What's bad is when you have a bunch of lemming citizens who trust their government. Better to have a bunch of citizens who hold their governments in suspicion. That's what our founding fathers taught. That we should hold our government in suspicion. And we have a government called the United Nations that sits on our soil in Manhattan, and every one of their meetings are in secret, and no one can go to them. In Washington, D.C., you go to listen to Congress now, guess what? You can't record anything. You can't write anything down, or you'll be under arrest. You can just sit there, listen to their 5 hours of chatter, and then hope you remember a thing or two, run out into the lavatory and write it down on a piece of paper. It's messed up. We should have open government where people can see what's going on. Anthrax. Powell pulled out a little vial of anthrax. Woo! Talked about how this little teaspoon of anthrax cleared out the entire U.S. Senate building. Hospitalized people, closed the building down for a week. Just this one little teaspoon. Here he is talking about anthrax. And yet it's already been proven that the anthrax that was used at the U.S. Senate building and around our country was government-grade anthrax and came from someone within our own government. And that's why they've been trying to catch that one government guy out east, and they haven't been able to collar him yet because they don't have the proof. That anthrax didn't come from Saddam. It came from our own country after 9/11. Yet he tries to draw this association. We come to find out of all the chemical weapons, which supposedly are many, according to Colin Powell, the one chemical or biological weapon they don't have is smallpox. Yet we're vaccinating all our people for smallpox. I mean, you sit there and you watch this and you're thinking to yourself, somebody pinch me. Are people really this dumb? We're going to vaccinate all these Americans for smallpox when the guy we have to go to war against because he's a threat who could give us smallpox doesn't even have it! Wake up and smell the coffee. Can you see a charade here? Colin Powell said that Iraq has enough chemical agents to fill 16,000 battlefield warheads. Where are all these missiles? He said they have 100 to 500 tons of chemical agents, and our technology can't detect it? We can't detect 500, 100 tons of chemical agents. We can't detect 16,000 missiles. Give me a break. But we can detect two guys talking on a low-band radio over in the desert in the middle of Iraq. We can get video footage of an Iraqi jet supposedly simulating dropping anthrax over a metropolitan area. How did we get that? But we can't get any pictures of all this stuff, right? No nukes. Colin Powell said they don't have any nuclear weapons. You could tell he was saddened to have to concede that point. Human rights. He talked about human rights. See, when you don't have any evidence, you have to embellish. Smoke and mirrors. You have to paint big. So you say things like a legacy of disturbing facts and behavior over the years. And then you talk about his human rights violations. And Colin Powell said, quote, his contempt for human rights. And he went on to talk about the torture and how they don't have the liberties that we have. You know, like to kill our own sons and daughters. You know, to kill their own sons and daughters like we do here in America. For sodomites to brag and march down the street about how filthy their lifestyle is. You know, they don't have those kind of liberties. Should be concerned about that. You know, like in Afghanistan, after we routed the Taliban, we legalized abortion and homosexuality. The first two acts done by the new regime that took over there. Bush, in his State of the Union address, said, quote, America is God's gift to humanity, unquote. So here you have Powell and you have Bush denouncing the human rights violations of Iraq. And I say to you, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. We kill over 1 million preborn babies a year in our nation. Government sanctioned. We export this killing all over the world. And we're going to talk about Iraq's human rights violations? Colin Powell went on to talk about how death row inmates were used by Saddam Hussein as human guinea pigs for experiments. Let me tell you, I have video footage where preborn babies have been used in American universities as human experiments. Who's worse, the person who uses death row inmates who are guilty, or the people who use innocent preborn babies for human experiments? In my opinion, both are bad. But the point is simply this. It's the pot calling the kettle black. Who are we to point our finger at them? We call him a madman, a torturer, a man who's killed his own people. And look at us. Give me strength. And after Colin Powell was all done, we didn't even get to hear what the other people had to say. Because we're too much of peons to be able to hear the other side, analyze, critique it, and make a decision for ourselves whether going to war is just or not. We were only given the party line, just like in communist Russia. I want to make some closing comments here. I'm against the draft, always have been against the draft. Why? Because governments should be able to convince us the cause is just, so we fight voluntarily, not by compulsion. When you have a country that needs to demand and make you fight, it's usually an unjust government. Just governments know that they can convince their people to fight. But now we have the draft being considered being restored. We have the Selective Service putting out commercials now, letting young men know all the money they'll get if they sign up for that Selective Service. Saw the commercial just yesterday. And all the dumb young men sign up. Ooh, money, free money from the government. The government loves me. And then I watch the news an hour later, and there's all the babies boo-hooing. I'm going to go fight. I didn't know when I signed up that I'd actually have to go kill people and put my life on the line. Our country's full of sissies. I'm so sick of it. Little babies. I encourage anyone who this government wants to draft, because they sure seem hell-bent on bringing it back into being, to be a conscientious objector in regards to this war. Why? Because it's an unjust war. I am not of this belief that we should support our troops. No, I don't believe that. If it's an unjust war, no one should participate. Anyone who does will not get my support. I don't care what level they're participating in it at. Think it through. It's a logical absurdity to say I'm against the war, but I support my troops. The ones who are actually over there pulling the triggers. By the way, everybody talks about how heroic these people are. Get real. You talk about one of the safest jobs in the world right now is to be an American soldier, because usually all you have to do is push buttons hundreds of miles away to slaughter people by the thousands. There's very few that actually put their life on the line. What do you think those ships are going to be doing out in the Gulf where no Iraqi can shoot back when they send all their bombs in to Iraq and kill thousands of citizens and soldiers? What kind of hero is that? A real man would want to fight eyeball to eyeball. At least know the other side has a chance to kill him too. So gung-ho about fighting. And that brings me to my final point. I've seen so many young Christian men want to run off and join up and fight the bad guys. And join George Bush's charade. And I'm here to encourage you not to do it. And I've kept about 3 people from doing it that I know of. And I'm here to encourage you again, young men, don't do it. Why would you take the best years of your life when you're at your strongest and give it to George Bush rather than to your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Why would you? Did you know that Iraq is the least anti-Christian Middle East nation that exists? Christians have more freedom in Iraq than any other Middle East nation. And yet that's the only Middle East nation we want to blow the hell out of. Like Afghanistan, when it comes to what's going on with Iraq, in my estimation, it's evil people fighting evil people. Saddam Hussein does not stand for what is right and what is good according to God's way. George Bush, the UN, and all their counterparts, the one-worlders, do not stand for God's word and His way. It's evil people killing evil people. So, why should you want to participate in it? Rather, our duty is to God to declare to the inhabitants of this world what is right and what is wrong according to His word, and call all to repentance, whether they live in Iraq or they live in the U.S. Call all to repentance and to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what we should be about doing our Father's business. I want to read one thing here to you. It's an article I thought was fantastic. Written by a former, or as he describes himself, a reformed politico. Used to be involved big in government. He says that his titles his column, Let the League Collapse. He uses a pseudonym because he doesn't want anyone to know who he is. Here's what he says. I just want to read this to you, and then we'll be done. I know it's been a little lengthy. The promise of a world assembly working in diplomatic cooperation is a failed experiment. With His Excellency, Colin Powell's recital of the proof against Iraq, the only smoking gun is the one that was concealed that points directly at the Bush clan. Saddam Hussein, having been the business partner of the crowd that insulates the president and his father from scrutiny, is a convenient villain. And there's a whole history going into that, too, which I'm not going to go into. Sure, Saddam is a bad man, but a cozy relationship gone sour was not revealed to the Security Council. Since the chronicle of how the world got to the point of this calculated conflict isn't significant, we are subjected to evidence of hide and seek as the impetus why war is a necessity. This entire approach avoids the real issues at play. The secret confession of most nations unites in the knowledge that the advancing Middle East war is about control of oil resources and expansion of a greater Israel. They know what's going on over there. Only the Americans have their noses in the sand, sniffing the smell on newly minted money. The dog and pony show that preempted assault is justified and necessary to eliminate a sanctuary for terrorists is about as credible as the argument that Iraq must remain a perpetual colony to the United Nations resolutions. This is good stuff. It's hard-hitting. Even Vietnam was admitted back into the club, or nations. But Bush won't be satisfied until the Iraqi thug is dead or shares that just cause cell with Manuel Noriega. If Saddam is the latest Hitler, where's the difference between Sharon and Stalin? Both Sharon and Saddam are oppressors, proficient in the use of intimidation, violence, and deceit. So why is one a so-called ally and the other is a bitter enemy? The member countries in the United Nations understand this reality. Just look at all the resolutions that Israel consistently ignores. Right? And yet we don't see us saying we're going to bomb them for not following these resolutions. Never any adverse consequences for the Zionists. The United States will always come to the rescue with that veto. So what is the point with all the useless talk when the final resolution comes down to military power and the will to inflict grave annihilation? Israel can have and threaten to use their nukes, but Pakistan must submit to their own occupation to prevent any possible risk to Tel Aviv. The world sees the clear hypocrisy in this mindset, but most Americans dodge the obvious. The only lasting function provided by the United Nations is indoctrination. The global design of the United States is to exert their will upon a world hostile to an imperial presence. By now it should be evident that the good citizens of the Republic oppose current foreign policy while the subjects of the U.S. empire clamor for greater intervention. I thought that was a great line. By now it should be evident that the good citizens of the Republic oppose current foreign policy while subjects of the U.S. empire clamor for greater intervention. The United Nations has no place in this equation, serves no useful purpose, and only compounds the schedule for the next foreign adventure. Our fellow neighbors never benefit from this interference, but are always required to pay in treasure and blood. The charade that the world community is reflected within the General Assembly is laughable. Let me repeat that to you. The charade that the world community is reflected within the General Assembly is laughable. The power resides in the economic control and the muscle to enforce compliance. That is so true. By the way, the people they have in the governments, most of the governments, are all one-worlders. They're all given over to this mentality. Every nationality, every country has those who care about their own selves more than they care about their own people. They care about their own sick selves, their power, their prestige, their financial well-being, their own personal financial well-being over their own people. And so when our country takes over country after country like it's been doing, it's easy to find people to throw up there of that nationality who say, oh, we're so glad you're here and we're ready to rule now. Because they'll do anything. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just human nature. So why get all worked up over the irrelevant? All the endless rhetoric and polemics that invoke turning swords into plowshares is a scam. This guy is good. Almost every sentence loaded. The only beating that will come from this diversion will be the forging of our chains under the fig leaf of peace. Is that fantastic? The only beating that will come from this diversion will be the forging of our chains under the fig leaf of peace. Real peace is rare, and aspirations that it can be imposed is insane. I mean, one after another. This guy's just hammering. Boom. Real peace is rare, and aspirations that it can be imposed is insane. Terrorism is the natural evolution of desperation when confronting a superior militaristic force. And you could preach reams on each sentence this guy's saying. It's so good. Terrorism is the natural evolution of desperation when confronting a superior militaristic force. This argument does not seek to justify unconventional combat, but only to acknowledge that it is inevitable. The terminal plight that flows from such subterranean methods and tactics is that, even in victory, the imperial master destroys itself with the further concentration of their own power, use of sophisticated military systems, and extended foreign deployments. That is a fantastic insight. The terminal plight that flows from such subterranean methods and tactics is that, even in victory, the imperial master destroys itself with the further concentration of their own power, use of sophisticated military systems, and extended foreign deployments. You're not going to hear this on Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw. Our government is not going to tell you these types of things. He says the United Nations was never intended to be the final authority. The task of blue helmets being the policemen for the world is a ruse. Their troops may be the foot grunts, but their masters are not generals. The elites pull all the strings and push every lever of policy. Just ask, who benefits from those policies? Will America win the coming war with Iraq, or will the cronies of the corporate/state axes just use the excuses of a naughty Saddam to expand their reach, restrict our domestic liberties, and feed the next cycle of continued conflict? This is great. Substitution based on a hysteria of an exaggerated war on terror with a regime change that will expand into a redrawing of the map in the Middle East is hardly the formula for bringing justice to the criminals of 9/11. This leap from Al-Qaeda to Iraq is far less credible than the evidence that Osama bin Laden is a creature of the CIA. And pray tell, let no man even remotely suggest that the horror that started this latest round of international Russian roulette involved collusion of those Israeli art students, domestic intelligence agencies, and foreign double agents. For we all know that to be tabbed a conspiracy theorist or to promote urban legend folklore is worse than being a part of Hamas or Hezbollah. Is the UN going to set this record straight? Even if it did, or was able to shed needed light, would the American public rise up and demand that our troops return home? Not those morons. Only the diplomats dining at Elaine's, immune from paying parking tickets and enjoying smoking inside their exempt offices, would spin their artful paltriness as indispensable. The illusion that the world is united is lethal, but the aspiration that it should be administered globally is terminal. This guy is good. It's good. You know, most Americans are still freaking out. Why are we going to war? More and more the press is doing its job, conditioning them to say, yeah, well, he's just an evil guy. And that's what basically everybody, he's an evil guy. Yeah, he's an evil guy. He's an evil guy. He's an evil guy. That's what the brain dead in America can be reduced to. If they pull this off, it is unbelievable. They pull this war off and attack Iraq, it is unbelievable because they've done an injustice and they've done it in front of the whole world. Because everybody's watched as the cameramen went right in with the inspectors and they were allowed access wherever they wanted to go. Everybody's wondering, yeah, well, I don't know, yeah, he's an evil guy, that's all we can go with. The truth of the matter is there's things going on behind the scenes where it matters to some, because they're going to make off big with this. The illusion that the world is united is lethal, but the aspiration that it should be administered globally is terminal. And that's the biggest thing I have hope in the sense of the one world empire. I know the nature of man. It won't work. In the end, it won't work. There might be tons of suffering. We might have to suffer a lot. But in the end, it won't work. Because I know the nature of man, as defined by Holy Scripture. After the British turned the Palestine matter over to the United Nations, this phony body sanctioned a blueprint for the State of Israel in 1948 with the Partition Plan Resolution 181. After all parties rejected that plan, the 1948-49 Israeli War of Independence was fought and resulted in the creation of a Jewish state, slightly larger than that which was proposed by the United Nations 2 years earlier. If the UN couldn't mediate the eternal conflict among feuding cousins back then, what possible competence can be drawn upon today to resolve an antagonism that has grown much deeper? The war with Iraq is one of conquest, and the UN has become a sideshow to the carnage. As long as nations are resigned to delude themselves and refuse to have the courage to face the real nature of Middle East discord, the world body should disperse with the charade. Weapons of mass destruction are all immoral. Is there any doubt that Israel has the will to use theirs? Just ask Jewish military historian Martin von Creveld. Remember, those of you who came to my house, I went over Creveld's book, The Transformation of War. Everything that he teaches in that book is what has become a reality in our nation and in the world over the last 10 years, particularly the last 3. He quotes Creveld. He says, quote, "We possess several hundred atomic warheads," talking about the Israelis. "We possess several hundred atomic warheads and rockets and can launch them at targets in all directions, perhaps even at Rome. Most European capitals are targets for our Air Force." Unquote. Anyone willing to wait for world condemnation for this arsenal or its potential use? Can you envision a UN expeditionary force dismantling Israeli nuclear facilities? You'll see the Swiss become a nuclear power before this daydream is realized. So why keep injecting adrenaline into a lifeless body of an extraneous hoax? The United Nations needs to be put to rest. The Bush crowd is bent on extending the Pax, P-A-X, America, one colony at a time. At least have the guts to admit that the transparent is, quote-unquote, irrefutable and undeniable. If only these words of Colin Powell were directed at the actual root cause of the problem. I had to read it because it was fantastic. It's an unjust, immoral war, and we should have nothing to do with it. Let's stand up and we'll close in a word of prayer.